Okay, cool. Great. All right, we're going to go live on YouTube. Awesome. All right, and then on YouTube, I'll post the synopsis. Okay, looks like we're live here on YouTube and Facebook. So we're going to be talking today about what to look out for when your vagus nerve is too dominant, right? So we're going to look at clinical warning signs and go through a pretty systemic list of things to look for. There are 7 primary indications that you have an overactive, chronically overactive vagus nerve. So we'll discuss that. But before we get started, we're going to do our simultaneous squeeze, which is a process by which we activate our vagus nerve by a breathing process. So we're going to take a deep breath in, big deep breath in, fill your lungs up to the top, then take an extra sip of air at the tippy top. You're going to hold your breath for 5 seconds and squeeze down. You're going to bear down. That's going to activate your vagus nerve. And then once you feel kind of a dizzy, lightheaded, nice feeling, you're going to take a very slow exhale through your mouth. Okay? So ready? In 3, 2, 1, breathe in. Take a sip of air. Hold and squeeze. And then slowly exhale. And maybe move your head around like this. Feels good. Okay. I feel like I'm at a Senor Frogs and they give you tequila and then they shake your head around like that. It feels great. Anyway, so okay, so let's crack into this. Today we're going to be talking about warning signs of an overactive vagus nerve. Very important subject. The first thing you need to be looking at are digestive disturbances. First thing, most important, digestive disturbances. What that can typically indicate is increased vagal activity can cause excessive stimulation of your digestive tract or your digestive system, leading to symptoms such as frequent bloating, gas, abdominal pain, and I would say quite severe diarrhea. We don't want severe digestive disturbances. Those can be an indication that your vagus nerve is chronically overactive, but not the only source of chronically overactive digestive function, but just one thing that can happen. Individuals experiencing these symptoms should consider the possibility of an overactive vagus nerve. At the later part of this video, remember we have 7 indications of overactivity in the vagus nerve to look for. We're going to talk about what to do if you are detecting some of these indications of an overactive vagus nerve. Moving on. Next one, second one, heart rate irregularities. So we talked about this yesterday, which is overactive vagus nerve can also indicate bradycardia, which means your heart rate is way too slow. Low blood pressure could also be an indication of a severely chronically overactive, unregulated vagus nerve. So that's also something to be mindful of. The vagus nerve does help regulate heart rate, but when it becomes overactive, it can result in heart rate irregularities. These may include sudden drops in heart rate, bradycardia, palpitations, or episodes of rapid heartbeats, tachycardia. If these symptoms persist or worsen, medical attention should be sought. Okay? So that's something to be mindful of. Next one, third one, excessive sweating. So another thing that is actually a very interesting thing now that it's summer is excessive sweating or dehydration can be an indication of a preliminary warning sign of impending overactive vagal nerve activity. That's also considered a vasovagal attack. Now, your vagus nerve depends on water. So your vagus nerve requires water to maintain acetylcholine levels. Acetylcholine levels. I typed that in the chat. Acetylcholine levels require adequate hydration. Okay? So when we talk about excessive sweating, that can be a warning sign that you're about to experience an overactive vagus nerve. Not exactly the opposite. So this one's pretty interesting. So an overactive vagus nerve can trigger excessive sweating, even in situations where sweating is not typically expected. So that's an important one to be noteful of. If you start sweating when you shouldn't be sweating, that could potentially indicate an overactive parasympathetic or vagus nerve in your body. Individuals who notice sudden and unexplained bouts of profuse sweating should consider the possibility of vagus nerve dysfunction, not necessarily over or underactivity, but something's wrong in the vagus nerve. And like I said, we'll talk about what you can do to resolve vagus nerve issues if you feel you might have some. Next one, very common, dizziness and fainting. Absolutely an indication of most likely a chronically overactive vagus nerve. If your vagus nerve is excessively overactive, meaning you have too much acetylcholine in your body, that's going to indicate problems with your vagus nerve. And those should be taken very seriously. If your dizziness and fainting persists, you should absolutely go to a medical professional. Another one. Anxiety and depression can also be highly correlated with vagus nerve activity or inactivity. That's really, really important to keep your mind on for sure. So the vagus nerve does have connections to the brain's emotional centers. A lot of people don't know this, that your vagus nerve connects right into your brain, and it connects to your emotional centers. So what you can typically see is that an overactive vagus nerve can contribute to increased emotion. And if your emotional health is poor, simply increasing emotions might actually feel like anxiety and or depression. But in my experience, when we stimulate the vagus nerve with ultrasound, we typically see the exact opposite of anxiety and depression. We actually see a very much of a calming sensation. So take that one with a grain of salt. Overactive vagus nerve activity does not create anxiety and depression in a healthy stimulation session. So, but like I said, your vagus nerve does innervate your emotions, so should be taken note of. Next one, this is our 6th out of 7th one, so we're almost there. Gastrointestinal disorders. So overactivity of the vagus nerve has been associated with certain gastrointestinal disorders, such as gastroparesis. Technically, gastroparesis is going to happen if your vagus nerve is not working, because you require your vagus nerve to have peristalsis. So not necessarily a fact that if your vagus nerve is overstimulated that you're going to have gastroparesis. It's typically the opposite of that. So something to be mindful of. Irritable bowel syndrome could be an indication of an overactive vagus nerve. That's possible. Symptoms may include chronic nausea, vomiting, or alternating bouts of constipation and diarrhea. Those can be an indication of an overactive vagus nerve for sure. The nausea and vomiting absolutely are vagal nerve related. Next one and last one, sleep disturbances. An overactive vagus nerve can, and also an overactive sympathetic system too, can disrupt sleep patterns, leading to difficulties falling asleep or staying asleep throughout the night. I'd say it's more a result of vagus nerve activity not being high enough while you're sleeping that leads to you waking up again. So these things are not set in stone. Individuals experiencing persistent insomnia or disrupted sleep should consider consulting a healthcare professional to explore potential vagus nerve involvement. Very important. So it's important to note that these warning signs are not exclusive to vagus nerve dysfunction and can be indicative of other underlying health conditions. Therefore, it's crucial to consult a healthcare professional for an accurate diagnosis and appropriate treatment if any of these symptoms persist or cause significant distress. Now, let's look back at some of these and how would we potentially go about treating some of these things as far as symptoms are concerned. So if we look at a couple things here, let's take severe gastroparesis, when the vagus nerve is not working in the digestive tract. How would we go about treating that? Well, we would actually want to stimulate the vagus nerve with ultrasound. That's going to help regulate gastrointestinal function. That's going to include peristalsis improvements, meaning food is going to move through your body properly. Stimulation of the proper areas that are innervated by the vagus nerve can actually increase digestive enzyme production naturally. That's also something that you would want to do if you're experiencing IBS or other forms of gastrointestinal distress, like bloating and other such things. So stimulation of the vagus nerve actually would be called for in a lot of these situations. The only ones where, if you were having symptoms, I would say hold off on stimulation, would be if you were these are the unstudied areas. I don't technically know. The one that I would mostly avoid stimulating the vagus nerve, potentially, would be during a bout of excessive sweating. So if you find yourself just sweating profusely all of a sudden, then I would hold off on stimulating your vagus nerve in that moment and try to hydrate yourself extremely well. And if it persists, then it's probably something you need to go have checked out by a doctor. Excessive sweating can be a sign of some very deep underlying pathologies that must be taken very seriously. And dehydration is extremely bad, because excessive sweating leads to dehydration, which leads to further excessive vagus nerve activity. And here in the summer months, when it's hot, if you're dehydrated and it's hot as well, you can experience a vasovagal attack. And that's actually a sign that your vagus nerve is overstimulated, is when you finally pass out. So if you have a vasovagal syncope, that's going to indicate that your vagus nerve is definitely overstimulated. But by the time you've passed out, it's already too late. So excessive sweating must be taken very seriously. The other one would be dizziness and fainting. Now, I'm mixed on this one, because some of the best experiences I've ever had with vagus nerve stimulation, I was doing alongside breathing, which typically can make you feel a little bit dizzy or a little bit faint-headed, whatever that means. And so you can have some of the most incredible experiences doing like Wim Hof breathing and vagus nerve stimulation at the same time. So I would say dizziness and fainting, if you're just like about to pass out, probably not the time to stimulate your vagus nerve, but something like in a controlled setting could be really good. In cases of anxiety and depression, absolutely, probably do want to stimulate your vagus nerve. Stimulation of the vagus nerve does not always mean increasing vagus nerve activity. Stimulating the vagus nerve is like playing traffic cop and saying, hey, let's regulate activity of the vagus nerve more properly according to a set rhythm. That's what things like ultrasound will typically do for the vagus nerve. So in cases of anxiety and depression, as is listed third up from the last post right here at this time of my saying this, anxiety and depression, you should be stimulating your vagus nerve with something like ultrasound. From what I know, ultrasound seems to be the best for that. Gastrointestinal disorders, that one's a toughie. That one really requires some in-depth knowledge. That everybody's a little bit different. Everybody's got different things going on. People who have like infections, candida, fungus, mold, detoxing, and they have gastrointestinal disorders, the kind of treatment options they have available to them are actually widely different than someone who's just occasionally having stomach upset. So that one you'd have to check with me. Sleep disturbances. Sleep disturbances respond incredibly well to vagus nerve stimulation, because vagus nerve stimulation, not overstimulation of the vagus nerve, but just stimulating it, meaning playing traffic cop and regulating the activity of the vagus nerve, is, as far as I've been able to tell, one of the best non-drug interventions for sleep problems that I've ever seen in my whole life. And I've seen all of them. I mean, I've seen people take like Ambien, people take Benadryl, all kinds of things to go to sleep. But vagus nerve stimulation before bed and upon waking seems to be one of the, definitely one of the best interventions for sleep related issues ever. And you'll see that from a lot of my clients is that they'll tell you, I've never had the sleep better than what I have when we do ultrasound. So for sleep disturbances, surely, certainly, probably would recommend that you do actually stimulate your vagus nerve instead of doing nothing. And I wouldn't reach for drugs first, but some of these things, as you know, I would. If you're excessively sweating at random bouts in time, could be an indication of an infection or probably a severe inflammatory condition. That could be really bad. So anyway, little disclaimer here at the very tippy top, bottom of the chat, which is important to note that these warning signs are not exclusive to vagus nerve dysfunction. These can be an indication of an overactive sympathetic system as well. So don't take them as, oh, sleep disturbances must be my vagus nerve is overactive, so I need to understimulate my vagus nerve. In almost all of these cases, still finding some way to accurately stimulate your vagus nerve is probably going to be one of the better ways to fix these problems versus anything. Okay. Cool. So yeah, as far as potential solutions for these, what I've absolutely found is that indeed stimulating your vagus nerve is some of the best options out there to resolve a number of these issues that I've written here through the chat. Good to see everybody joining us here, right here, kind of at the tail end of the video. But basically, if you guys can just scroll through and look at the specific indications, digestive disturbances, heart rate irregularities, excessive sweating, vasovagal attack, dizziness and fainting, anxiety and depression, gastrointestinal disorders, and sleep disturbances are an indication that something is not working properly in your vagus nerve. And if you are looking for solutions, I would point you to what I think is the best solution on hand in the world at this point in time would be the phase 1 program, which you can check out and join and read all about to see how we're using ultrasound to stimulate the vagus nerve, which is the first in the world, only program in the world that is able to do that. So that's where I'd recommend you go if you're like, wow, I actually really am concerned about sleep disturbances and I'd like to find some answers for that. The phase 1 coaching program could be a really good fit for you. So cool. Well, that wraps it up for today. We're going to put the link for that here in YouTube as well. Thanks so much for joining us on both platforms. We'll end the video here on YouTube. Thanks for joining, and head over to Facebook for questions. Thank you, and bye-bye. Awesome. Cool. We got some people over on YouTube.